You have been making yourself smaller for a very long time. Not in the obvious way. Not in the way that announces itself as low self-worth or insecurity or the specific deficit you could point to and explain. In the subtle, daily, accumulated way. The opinion modified before it leaves your mouth because you read the room and decided it would be received badly. The achievement mentioned briefly, then quickly redirected to someone else's contribution. The need expressed so softly, so qualified, so wrapped in apology that by the time it arrives the person receiving it can barely tell that something was being asked. The space you occupy in rooms, in relationships, in your own imagination of what is possible for you is smaller than you are. Not because you are genuinely that small, because you were taught, somewhere and sometime and thoroughly enough that the teaching settled into your nervous system as truth, that being that small was the price of being acceptable, the price of being loved, the price of not making things difficult, the price of being the kind of person who does not cause trouble, who does not ask too much, who does not claim what might reasonably be questioned. This audiobook is about the habit of smallness, where it came from, how it operates, what it has been costing, quietly and accumulating across the years of its operation, and what the full-sized version of your life, not an inflated, aggressive, demanding version, but the version that takes up exactly the space you are entitled to, actually looks and feels like. You were not born small. The smallness was constructed, and anything that was constructed can, with full understanding of why it was built and what it is now doing, be dismantled. Part 1. Where smallness begins. Nobody is born apologizing for their existence. Watch a child before the conditioning takes hold, and you will see something uncompromising in its self-assertion. The unself-conscious claiming of attention, of care, of the specific things it needs. The cry that does not ask permission to be loud. The joy that does not check whether anyone else is finding it excessive. The demand that is made without qualification because the need is real, and the child has not yet learned that needs must be earned. Somewhere between that child and the adult who apologizes before speaking, who edits the honest reaction before anyone can object to it, who has a fluent and automatic skill for making themselves less, something happened. Not necessarily something dramatic, not necessarily anything that would have looked, from the outside, like the installation of a lifelong limitation. Often something small, repeated, cumulative. A parent who was uncomfortable with strong emotion. A classroom where the forthright answer was discouraged. A peer group where the quickest way to belong was to take up less space than the dominant members. A family system in which the unspoken rule was that certain people's needs came first, and yours was not among them. The psychologist Harriet Lerner describes what she calls the deselfing process, the gradual, often unconscious erosion of the self's authentic positions, needs, and responses in favor of the relationship's harmony or the social group's cohesion. Deselfing is not dramatic. It is incremental. Each small suppression of the authentic response is individually justifiable. Individually, none of them seem significant. Accumulated across years, they produce a person who has become so skilled at the management of their own authentic presence that they can no longer clearly distinguish between what they genuinely think and feel and what they have learned to perform. The philosopher Charles Taylor wrote about what he calls the politics of recognition, the observation that the self is, in significant part, formed through the recognition or misrecognition of others. When the significant people in your developmental environment respond to your authentic self with warmth and affirmation, the self expands into that recognition. When they respond with anxiety, disapproval, withdrawal, or the subtle but clear signal that you are too much, too loud, too needy, too direct, too present, the self contracts. Not permanently, but the contraction, repeated often enough, becomes the resting posture. And the resting posture, held long enough, becomes what feels like natural size. The question that begins the undoing is this: what was my authentic self taught to be too much of? Not in the abstract, specifically. Too emotional, too loud, too ambitious, too direct, too sexual, too needy, too intellectual, too challenging, too present. The specific content of the smallness instruction tells you everything about what the authentic self was doing when it was told to stop. And the authentic self, however long ago it was told to stop, has not actually stopped. It has simply gone underground. It is still there, still wanting the things it always wanted, still trying to find expression through the narrowed channels that the habit of smallness has left open. Finding those channels, widening them, one honest expression at a time, is the work, not the dramatic overnight reclamation of a fully expressed self. The patient, daily, sometimes frightening practice of allowing the authentic response to reach the surface before the editing begins, of expressing the opinion before the room's likely reaction has been calculated, of stating the need without the qualification that reduces it to almost nothing, of taking up in the ordinary moments of ordinary days the space that was always yours and that was simply, for too long, left unclaimed. Part 2. The cost of chronic smallness. The cost of playing small is rarely presented as a single large bill. It arrives in the form of 1,000 small charges, distributed across years and relationships and opportunities, that individually seem manageable and that collectively produce a life that is operating at a fraction of its actual capacity. The cost is not always visible in what goes wrong. It is most clearly visible in what never quite gets started. The relationship that never reaches the depth it could have because one person's authentic self was never fully in the room. The career that stayed comfortably below the level at which the real capabilities would have been genuinely tested. The creative work that was shaped so thoroughly by the imagined objections of the imagined audience that it lost the specific quality, the genuine personal vision, the uncompromised authentic voice, that would have made it irreplaceable. The life that was pleasant and reasonable and responsible, and that did not, in the honest accounting of the person living it, feel like theirs. Research on authentic living consistently shows that the perception of authenticity in daily life, the degree to which people feel they are expressing their genuine values and characteristics rather than performing a required role, is one of the most powerful predictors of well-being. Not happiness in the pleasant feeling sense. Well-being in the deeper sense of vitality, meaning, and the sense that one's life is genuinely lived rather than endured. The person who has spent years playing small has, in a very real sense, been spending the primary resource of their life, their time, their attention, their energy, in the service of a version of themselves that they did not choose, and that serves primarily the comfort of others. The existentialist Simone de Beauvoir wrote about what she called the immanent life, the life lived within the prescribed limits, the life that does not transcend the given but simply inhabits it, and contrasted it with the transcendent life, the life that reaches past the given toward the genuine possibilities of the self. She argued that the immanent life, however comfortable, is a form of bad faith, a denial of the freedom that is constitutive of human existence. Playing small is the immanent life in its most intimate form, the self that could transcend its prescribed limits, choosing not to, or, more precisely, having been taught so thoroughly that transcending is dangerous that the choice barely registers as a choice. There is also a relational cost that is rarely calculated. The people in your life who experience only the smaller version of you are being deprived of something real. The friendship that could have been deeper, the partnership that could have been more genuinely mutual, the collaboration that could have been more creative, the parent-child relationship that could have modeled something different for the generation that followed. Every relationship you have inhabited in reduced form has been a relationship that did not receive what you actually had to offer. The smallness is not only a loss for you, it is a loss for everyone whose life intersects with yours. The bill, when it is honestly calculated, is larger than most people want to sit with. Not as a source of regret, regret is the least useful response available. As a source of clarity, as the honest acknowledgement of what has been paid and what was purchased with that payment and whether the transaction was worth it. For most people who examine it honestly, It was not. The smallness purchased some safety, some belonging, some relief from the specific anxiety of visibility. And it cost the life it was supposed to protect. Part 3. The myth of humility. The habit of smallness has a disguise that makes it particularly difficult to address. The disguise is called humility, and in many cultural, religious, and social contexts, humility, the deflection of attention, the minimization of achievement, the reflexive deferral to others, is not only accepted but actively celebrated as a virtue, which means that the person who has spent their life playing small has very often been receiving social rewards for the behavior that is costing them the most. Genuine humility is a real and valuable quality. It is the accurate assessment of one's capacities, not inflated, not deflated. The recognition of one's limits alongside the recognition of one's strengths. The willingness to acknowledge what one does not know and to learn from those who know it better. This humility is not smallness. It is accuracy. The person who practices genuine humility occupies their actual size, neither more nor less than what they genuinely are. The counterfeit version, the performed diminishment that passes for humility, but is actually fear wearing humility's costume, is different in its quality and its motivation. It does not emerge from the accurate assessment of one's capacities. It emerges from the need to be perceived as unthreatening, from the avoidance of the envy or judgment or challenge that visibility might attract, from the long ago learned understanding that being seen clearly at full size is not safe. The counterfeit humility keeps the social environment manageable by never giving it anything real to respond to. The philosopher Iris Murdoch drew a distinction between the humble person and the self-effacing person that is exact here. The humble person sees the world clearly, including themselves, and responds to what they see with appropriate care and respect. The self-effacing person has made themselves small as a way of not having to engage with the demands of genuine visibility. One is a virtue, the other is a defense. And the defense, however successfully it has maintained the social peace, has done so at the cost of the genuine engagement with life that Murdoch considered the foundation of all moral seriousness. The false modesty that deflects compliments before they can be received. The habit of attributing success to luck or to other people rather than to the genuine capability that produced it. The refusal to claim expertise, authority, or the right to be heard on subjects that years of serious engagement have genuinely qualified you to speak on. Each of these, examined honestly, is not humility. It is the avoidance of the specific anxiety of being seen at full capacity, of the risk that the full capacity once claimed will be found insufficient, of the vulnerability of saying this is what I can do and having reality respond with a verdict. The reclamation of appropriate self-regard, not arrogance, not the inflation of genuinely modest capacities into something they are not, but the honest, quiet, non-apologetic acknowledgement of what you actually have and what you have actually done, is not the abandonment of humility. It is the replacement of counterfeit humility with the genuine article. And the genuine article does not require you to be smaller than you are. It requires only that you be exactly as large and exactly as accurate about that largeness as the truth of what you are actually capable of demands. Part 4. Taking up space, what it actually means. Taking up space is not the same as taking over. This distinction matters enormously for the person who has been small for a long time, because the fear that drives the smallness often presents itself as the protection of others from a self that is, if fully expressed, overwhelming or selfish or too much. And the invitation to take up more space can feel, from inside that fear, like an invitation to become the thing the fear was trying to prevent. Taking up space means occupying the room you are actually in with your actual presence, allowing your genuine responses to reach the surface rather than intercepting them before they arrive, speaking from your own perspective without the reflexive qualification that pre-apologizes for the perspective having a perspective at all, expressing your needs directly. as information about what you require rather than as requests that must be carefully framed to minimize the imposition they represent, making decisions based on your own values and judgment rather than the anticipated approval or disapproval of the people around you. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, in his study of self-actualizing people, individuals who had developed, by his assessment, the fullest possible expression of their human potential, noted that they shared a quality he called psychological freedom, not freedom from difficulty or from the ordinary constraints of a social life. The internal freedom of a person who makes their choices from their own center, from their genuine values, their honest assessments, their authentic preferences, rather than from the continuous monitoring of what others expect and require. This freedom is not indifference to others. The self-actualizing people Maslow studied were, in many cases, deeply committed to others and to their communities. But their commitment was genuine rather than compelled. It came from genuine care rather than from the anxiety about what would happen to the relationship if they stopped providing. The distinction between genuine giving and compelled giving, between the choice made from freedom and the choice made from fear, is invisible from the outside and completely different from the inside. And the person doing the compelled giving has long since stopped being able to tell the difference. Taking up space in conversation means allowing your full contribution to be made without truncating it to the size you have judged to be acceptable. It does not mean dominating. It means matching your spoken presence to your actual presence, finishing your thought, defending your position when it is challenged, not because you are certain you are right, but because the position deserves the same consideration you would give to any other position raised in the conversation. Disagreeing when you genuinely disagree, without converting the disagreement into an apology before it can be heard as what it is. Taking up space in a relationship means being a full participant rather than a facilitator. It means having preferences that are expressed rather than continuously deferred. It means making requests that are clearly requests rather than disguised hopes that the other person might intuit and voluntarily fulfill. It means being willing to disappoint someone occasionally in service of something genuine, rather than maintaining the perfect record of accommodation that leaves no room for the accommodator inside the relationship at all. Taking up space is not selfishness. It is the prerequisite for the mutual, real, genuinely reciprocal connection that the performing of smallness perpetually approaches and never achieves. Part 5. The practice of full size. The return to full size does not happen in a single decision. It happens in the accumulation of small decisions, each one choosing the full expression over the habitual reduction, until the full expression becomes the default, and the reduction becomes the effortful choice rather than the automatic one. It is the same mechanism through which the smallness was built: repetition, reinforcement, the gradual establishment of a new default, applied now in the opposite direction. The first practice is the pause before the edit. The honest response arises. Before it reaches the surface, before the habitual modification reduces it to the acceptable version, there is a moment, a fraction of a second in which the original is still present and the reduction has not yet occurred. The practice is to notice that moment, to be present in it long enough to ask, what is the original response? What would I actually say if I were not adjusting for the room? Not necessarily to say that thing. Discernment about what to express and what to hold is genuinely appropriate, but to know it, to have conscious access to the unedited version before deciding what to do with it. The second practice is the claiming of competence, the deliberate, non-apologetic acknowledgement of what you genuinely know and can do. In the conversation about a subject you have spent years with, the willingness to be the authority rather than performing uncertainty you do not actually feel. In the room where your contribution is needed, the willingness to make it without the preamble of qualification that pre-shrinks it before it can be assessed on its merits. In the work you have done well, the willingness to say so, not as self-promotion, but as accurate information that the people who work with you need and deserve. The author Marianne Williamson wrote words that have been widely quoted and widely misattributed. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. The fear of the full-sized self is not only the fear that the full size will be found insufficient. It is also the fear that the full size will be found to be real, that the capabilities are genuine, that the contribution is significant, that the life lived at full size would be genuinely different from the one lived in reduction. And that difference carries its own specific terror, the terror of being responsible, fully and without excuse, for what that genuine size produces. The third practice is the tolerance for the discomfort of visibility. Taking up more space will feel wrong before it feels right. The nervous system that was trained to associate visibility with danger will signal alarm each time the usual reduction is not performed. The practice is to recognize the alarm as the old training rather than as genuine present tense danger. To stay with the discomfort of being seen at full size, not indefinitely, not beyond the point of genuine cost, but long enough for the evidence to accumulate that the visibility is survivable, that the room can hold the full-sized version, that the relationship does not dissolve when the authentic response arrives unmodified, that the world, it turns out, can manage you at your actual size. You have been small for long enough. Not because the smallness was wrong, it was the most intelligent response available in the conditions that produced it. But those conditions have changed. The people whose comfort required your reduction are no longer in the room, or no longer have the power over your safety and belonging that they once had. The cost of remaining small has compounded past the point at which the original exchange was reasonable. And the full-sized version of you, which has been present this entire time, underneath the habitual reduction, waiting with considerable patience, is ready, not for perfection, for the honest, imperfect, visibly present engagement with the life that was always actually supposed to be yours.